This is the podcast for lifestyle and design in Ottawa. Intimate stories from our guests, an opportunity to discover hidden gems, share and get advice, recommendations, and more. All designed to help you be the best you that you can be. Your host from OttawaDesigners.com, Cindria Blench.
Hi, you're on OttawaDesigners.com. We're with Stuntman Stu here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
I want to hear so much more about your backstory. Thank you so much for being so open with everybody and sharing basically round one, round two. Can you tell me how you found out initially that you got sick?
It was February 16th, 2006. I wasn't well for a couple of weeks leading up to the diagnosis. I was having incredible nosebleeds that would last for hours, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. So I did what everyone else does when they're sick. They go to Google and try and figure out what the issue is.
Dr. Google.
Dr. Google. So I thought I was having a brain aneurysm. I didn't know what it was. So I went to the pharmacy that day. I said, I think I'm low in iron because according to my symptoms, I'm low in iron. And the pharmacist looked at me and she heard the list of symptoms I had and said, go to the Emerge right now. So Shauna Devison at Shoppers Drug Mart in Meadowlands and Prince of Wales saved my life that day. Wow. I immediately went to the Civic and wasn't diagnosed until much later. The Civic transferred me to the Ottawa General. When I arrived to the General, they told me the news that I have leukemia. And I cancer. And they said, yes. I said, can we beat it? They said, yes. I said, okay, let's begin.
Wow. That's just incredible. So now this happens to you. You come forward and you find the diagnosis, and then they tell you that you need a transplant. How do you come out with this? How do you go public asking for such a big donation? Where does this donation come from?
Well, initially, there was no choice but to plead for the public's help, because, you know, if I didn't get the transplant, I could technically beat it with chemo, but the cancer would come back. That's what we were told. So you've got that in front of you and you have to make a public plea. And we tried through the Canada's Lifeline. There wasn't a match. And then because I'm Jewish, it was suggested that as almost 1 million Israelis are in the network. Anyone that's in the Israeli army has to immediately give up their sample of their bone marrow. So that's why the registry is so big.
Wow. So that really saved you. So then you connect with this gentleman, and how does he volunteer this? How does he approach you? What do you say? This must have been incredible, like winning the lottery.
So it was like winning the lottery. Initially, I didn't know who it was. I had to wait 1.5 years to find out who the donor was, because they can't tell you. You have to wait a certain period of time, at least a year. I was told that when he heard of my request that I wanted to get to know who donated to me. Initially, he didn't want to be involved. He just said it's an honor to do this. And this radio guy in a city called Ottawa, and then he wanted to get to know me. So in March of 2018, about a month after my father died from lung cancer, I got to meet David Levy with my family and my mother at the Ottawa airport, which was a mind-blowing experience.
I saw that video. It was touching. It was hard for people not to see that video and get really emotional and teared up. How did you start Stu Strong?
The night I was diagnosed, I was texting just a few close friends. And one of those friends was Angie's husband, Angie, who I work with at Majic, longtime friend, Angie Poirier, and her husband, Adam Cote. We were in a group chat with my wife after I got diagnosed. And he said to me, one of the last things he said before I had to go text other people is, he said, "You got this, hashtag Stu Strong." So Adam came up with the saying.
It's a good one.
But a week after it was a week
Really?
after I was diagnosed, I was sitting in the hospital bed, and I said, I can't just sit here and do nothing. So I'm involved with a lot of charities. I've been on the opposite end so many times. Let's raise money for Stu Strong. Let's raise money for the hospital. So I talked to the hospital foundation, and they said, where do you want the money to go? I said, I want the money to go to leukemia patients like me. So since 2016, I'm proud to say we have raised over $315,000 for leukemia and stem cell research at the Ottawa Hospital.
That's incredible. So now COVID must have affected the way for you to raise money for this. I know I myself really love to host charity events, and you have to think outside of the box. How has COVID affected your ability to continue to raise money for Stu Strong? How can people help?
Well, I'm not actively looking for money for Stu Strong right now. I decided to the round two sequel that I wasn't going to ask people for money. The last couple of years, a good friend of mine hosted a charity event at his offices. Josh Sarrett is a really good friend of mine, and he hosted donor parties, Stu's Pool Party 1 and Stu's Pool Party 2, to raise money for exhaustions, which
That's
gave me
awesome.
my life back. Yeah.
That's
So
really, really cool.
Josh reached out to the business community, and we had two successful parties where we raised about 150 grand for exhaustions.
Wow. So, how is your family dealing with all of this news? This must have been as much of a blow. How do families get support as well? Because, I mean, that must be very hard for a wife to potentially think that she's losing her husband, kids to be scared that they potentially could lose their father. How have your family been supported, and how can other families get support for, themselves?
Well, that's a great question. Mm, being a part, my wife's Italian, so a big part of a big Italian family. She has so many people to count on, and I mean, hundreds of people reached out to us in the beginning. A lot of friends, a lot of acquaintances, and we had that network of people that wanted to help out. So even still, the second time around, there was lots of people to help. I mean, this past year, when I got diagnosed again in January, that was right in the middle of my son Mateo's hockey season. So the coaching staff were, and still are, uh, salt to the earth people, just helping out whenever we needed it. I mean, they would drive Mateo to hockey, pick him up when my wife couldn't do it. And even tonight, my son's got a hockey game, and I'm going to try and drive him if I'm not too tired. But if not, we've got this great community of parents that will volunteer their time.
That's incredible. So I think that that's the big resounding thing is having support when you're going through that for everybody and having that solid network of people that you can ask for help and fall back. Have you had trouble asking for help, or have you been able to surrender yourself now to accept help? What advice would you give for people in the same position as yourself to help them move forward? And you
The
look good
first,
bald.
thank you. Just scratching my head.
It suits you.
I get my daughter to shave my head once a week.
They
So,
say you're smarter with the balder head too.
oh really? I'll believe that when I see it.
There you
To answer your question, what was your question again? Sorry.
go. Well, getting support from
Oh yeah, yeah.
everybody.
Sorry, chemo brain.
No worries.
The first time around, I had a hard time asking for help because I was the guy that had it all figured out, and it was hard for me to ask for help the first time around. But second time around, I didn't hesitate at all. I reached out to people. I was bold with requests, and I'm like, look, I can't do this. Can you do it for me, or can you do it with me? I mean, there was a lot of things to do around the house. I had to count on a lot of people to do things that I normally do, which was hard for me to give up the reins of that. But when you're in a hospital bed, for the better part of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you can't
Absolutely.
go out and do it yourself. And then when you get home, you don't have any energy, so you have to ask for people's help.
Absolutely. And I think that that's really important. I mean, especially if you have children, you want to be able to have the energy that you have to spend time just doing that, not putting out the garbage and things like that. So, what a lot of people don't know what to expect when they get a cancer diagnosis or a leukemia diagnosis. What are the steps of how your body's going to feel going through certain treatments? Can you explain to people just in a very easy breakdown of how the steps are when you receive a diagnosis, how you're going to start to feel, and then the recovery process to that, just so they can get an understanding of what to expect on a more real level?
That's a great question. I get that asked all the time. I mean, people reach out to me on all the platforms and say, I was just diagnosed with this. My father was just diagnosed with this. What do I do? So I always tell people no two cancer diagnoses are the same. From my personal perspective, getting diagnosed and having this mountain of information in front of you of what drugs to take, when to take them, is daunting. So you're going to feel like shit for the first couple of weeks when you're getting chemotherapy and you're getting pumped with drugs. I mean, everyone reacts differently. In 2016, I sailed through chemo and I was
Okay.
never sick. In 2020, I was sick every single day,
Oh.
barfing in the hospital,
Same
almost on
chemo, same
uh,
medicines, or
different.
different?
The second time around, it was different chemo because the bone marrow transplant was much riskier this time. So the doctors concocted this melange of chemo that wouldn't be as hard on my system, but the fact that it wasn't hard on my system actually made me more sick, which is bizarre
Okay.
because
Strange,
yeah,
strange.
they're pumping poison through
So,
your body and your body reacts in a different way.
wow.
And the recovery is just as hard because you're I remember after the transplant, I said to the doctor, how much longer? I've been here for a week. Realistically, how much longer? And the doctor looked at me and said, if your body cooperates, you could be out of here in a month. And
Wow.
I was home just before Father's Day, which I wanted to be home for.
Wow. That's intense. So now your second bone marrow transplant, was that with the same donor? Was that with somebody else? What were the steps to receiving that one? Were you able to
So
know
because of
where to get it?
So the second time around, as mentioned, it was much more difficult and riskier because not only do they have to wipe out your immune system, but they have to wipe out the existing
Existing, yeah.
existing donor. One of
Okay.
the Just going to go off track here. One of the side effects of all this chemo last 4 years has been my speech. Um, John Milkey, who's producing this, certainly knows I've had better days with my
Wow.
voice, but
Good to
yeah,
know
it's
that
it's
that's
been
a
it's
side
done it's
effect.
done a number on my speech. So they couldn't go back to the same donor because obviously it didn't work. It only worked up until 2020. So they had
Okay.
to reach out to a new donor in the database of Azerbaijan in the Israeli army. I don't know who that donor is yet. I've asked if
Okay.
we could do a virtual meeting because I
Okay.
don't think with the travel restrictions, we certainly can't have somebody coming over to Canada. Although my bone marrow made it over in the middle of a pandemic, that was a different story.
That's
I have
incredible.
to wait a year.
And how does bone marrow get from there across the border? How long does it have to survive in a plane before it makes it to you? What are the steps of that? How do you piece it together?
I believe that once the bone marrow is extracted from the donor, it's got about 36 hours that it can be live until it's
Okay.
it's done. So it's of the utmost importance to get that flown over ASAP. So
Absolutely.
it's my understanding that it was flown over. It was extracted on May 24th, and I got it on May 26th.
Wow. So now if people wanted to become donors themselves for bone marrow, what are the steps in Canada to do so?
Oh my God, they're so easy. It's a matter of a swab. It literally takes 5 seconds to swab the inside of your cheek. You
Okay.
go to blood.ca and you can click on the I want to donate, and there's a number of options there that you can donate blood, become a bone marrow transplant, bone marrow a donor. But there's a number of ways you can do that there.
So now, as far as being a donor, I know with when you give blood, there's certain restrictions. You can't have a tattoo within a certain amount of time. If you take certain medications, things like that. Are there more restrictions or less restrictions if you wanted to be a bone marrow transplant donor?
That I don't know, but I mean, I assume that whatever restrictions are there in place for a reason, but I don't
Yeah.
know necessarily for bone marrow if it's different.
Okay, so now moving forward at this stage, where do you see yourself going in 5 years from now? Do you see Stu Strong going, continuing, starting up again? Do you see yourself back at Magic 100 with Angie Poirier? I know she has her kids and she's so overwhelmed and loves doing the show with you. So, what are your plans? When are we going to see you back?
Well, I'm hoping I got the okay from the doctors to go back to work with Angie and Janelle at Magic as of January. So I'm hoping that I'll be broadcasting live from this very spot in January with the girls.
Amazing. Amazing. That's fantastic. And can you tell us, as far as family, everything, how has family been doing with the COVID? Has this been better for COVID? I guess it's pretty good for you, keeping you safe and protected, having the whole world hopefully wearing masks and abiding by rules. How has COVID played in your life?
Um,
Has it?
COVID has been actually, good in a way that, there's not a lot of things going on because in 2016, there's a lot going on. And I had this fear of missing out. I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't go to this. I can't go to this. I felt really bad, but I mean, granted, we're in a pandemic and everyone's feeling shitty.
Yeah.
And, the kids were at home for a long time. They just recently went back to school.
Okay.
Um, and they're navigating through this crazy time and the online classes some days in
Oh,
school
yeah.
other days. I mean, it's crazy for everybody. What works for us doesn't necessarily work for you and vice versa. So we're trying to get through it as best as we can. I mean, there's
And
yelling. We're no different than anybody else.
exactly. Any tips that you have for during these pandemic times, keeping it calm and happy for parents?
I would suggest a lot of visits to the LCBO.
That's a good one. Or
um,
one really big visit.
yeah, this is not vodka, by the way, it's just water.
Are you sure? Are you
Yeah,
sure?
yeah, but
Excellent.
just
Well, thanks.
in the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, "Oh, Mateo, my son is sleeping way too late. My daughter's doing too much of this." And finally, we just said, "Screw it. We'll just ride the wave."
Yeah, exactly. So let things go, be easygoing. That's a big one. Adaptable, stuff like that. Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear more about your backstory and everything. You're an inspiration to so many people, and I'm glad that we're able to share this. I'm thinking of you, and we're sending our love always. Thank you for being
Thank
on
you.
OttawaDesigners.com.
Thank you very much. And thanks to John Milkey for being the man behind the scenes.
Thank you, John Milkey. Thank you so much.